Have you noticed how loud the world has become? Everywhere you turn, someone is speaking, defending, explaining, proving, performing. It's a constant race to be heard, to be understood, to be validated. But what if I told you that true power doesn't always raise its voice? Welcome back to Stoic Power Lab, your daily dose of timeless Stoic wisdom. You see, real strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent. And that silence? It's not weakness. It's not fear. It's not a sign you're giving up. It's wisdom. It's restraint. It's a sacred kind of discernment. There's a silence that doesn't come from defeat, but from knowing. Knowing who you are, whose you are, and where you're going. That kind of knowing doesn't need applause. It doesn't beg to be seen. It simply walks in peace. And that peace? It speaks louder than any argument ever could. In a world that rewards reaction, silence can feel like rebellion. People may misunderstand you. They might call you distant, cold, or prideful. But don't be shaken, because when your silence is rooted in strength, not avoidance, it becomes a statement of spiritual clarity. Think about it. How many times have you spoken in haste and regretted it later? How often has reacting stolen your peace? But silence creates space. Space to think, space to listen, space to let God move in the unseen. There's a kind of stillness that heaven teaches, a stillness that the world doesn't always understand. But it's in that stillness that your soul gets stronger. It's in that quiet that your identity is anchored again. You begin to remember, you don't have to shout to matter. You don't have to argue to prove you're right. The noise of the world may be loud, but the voice of God is still and small. And if we never get quiet, we may never hear it. So if you're feeling tired of defending yourself, tired of explaining your heart, maybe this is your permission to stop, not to shut down, but to step back into stillness. Because silence isn't a void. It's a vessel. And when it's filled with peace, clarity, and purpose, it becomes one of the loudest things in the room. Let them talk. Let them misunderstand. You don't need to perform for peace. You just need to return to it. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply say nothing at all. There's a moment in every life when you come face to face with this truth. You no longer need to explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You know the ones. The ones who twist your words, question your motives, or minimize your heart. The ones who don't really want the truth. They want confirmation for their assumptions. And no matter how sincere, honest, or vulnerable you try to be, they only hear what they want to hear. That's when silence becomes a choice, not from fear, but from wisdom. A deep, soul-protecting wisdom that says, I refuse to keep bleeding for people who never had the hands to heal me. Silence, in its truest form, is not surrender. It's strength in its most mature form. It's a sacred boundary that whispers, I am done performing for connection. I will no longer negotiate my peace just to be understood. And I know it's hard, especially when your heart still cares, when part of you still longs to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. But there comes a point when you realize that the energy you spend defending yourself is costing you the energy you need to become yourself. Sometimes, silence is the most powerful statement you'll ever make. It becomes your testimony, not of defeat, but of spiritual maturity. When people slander you, mock your silence, misinterpret your distance, let them. Because while they talk, God moves. He steps in as your defender, your strength, your voice in the unseen. The same mouths that once doubted you will be silenced, not by revenge, but by the fruit of your peace. You don't have to clap back. You don't have to explain. You don't have to show up to prove anything. Because peace is proof enough. And here's something you'll notice. Your absence will begin to echo. It will speak louder than anything you could have ever said. The ones who once dismissed you will feel it. Not in anger, but in realization. Because you were the consistent one, the steady one, the heart that gave freely without demand. And when that presence is no longer available, it leaves a silence that shakes. You see, absence reveals what presence often hides. It exposes who only valued your availability, not your soul. It unearths the truth of who was truly for you and who just got used to you being there. So if you find yourself exhausted from explaining, tired of fighting to be understood, step back and let your silence speak. You're not running away. You're not giving up. You're honoring what God placed inside of you. You're saying, "My soul is sacred, and not everyone deserves access to it." In a world that rewards noise, your quietness becomes an act of holy rebellion, a declaration that your peace is non-negotiable, and that God, who sees all, knows all, and defends like no other, is your advocate. So today, I invite you to choose silence, not as avoidance, but as alignment. Let your absence teach what your presence no longer can. Let God do the talking, because in His time, truth speaks. And when it does, it doesn't just restore, it elevates. It's a strange thing, how people can grow so comfortable with your kindness that they begin to mistake it for weakness. You show up, you care, you listen, you forgive, again and again, until one day you don't. And suddenly, your silence becomes louder than any words you've ever spoken. Let's talk about that moment when you stop showing up for people who always expected you to, but never truly valued you. Not because you were angry, not because you wanted revenge, but because you finally understood you were giving too much to those who gave so little in return. Some people don't realize what they have until you stop handing it to them. They confuse your patience with dependence, your compassion with obligation, your availability with permission. But when you quietly step back, their illusion falls apart. Silence reveals what presence used to protect. When you were always there, picking up the phone, offering support, being the safe place, they never questioned your heart. They just assumed it would always be there. But the moment your presence becomes absence, it exposes everything. It reveals who only loved the version of you that was convenient, who kept you around not for who you were, but for what you offered. The support, the attention, the affirmation, the light you gave so freely. And when that light goes quiet, they feel it. Not right away. No. At first they may think it's a phase, that you'll come back, that they still have access to you. But over time, as the silence lingers, the truth sets in. And for the first time, they begin to understand the weight of your love, the value of your heart, the power of what they once had access to and lost. But here's what's beautiful. By the time they notice, you're already different. You're not waiting in bitterness. You're not hoping for an apology. You're healing. You're growing. You're stepping into a version of yourself that no longer needs to prove your worth by being overly available. Silence didn't break you. It built you. It brought you back into alignment with purpose. It reminded you that your presence is a gift, not an obligation. That your soul isn't meant to be consumed, but cherished. So if you're in that season, that quiet, sacred season where you've pulled back, not in anger, but in wisdom, know this. You're not losing people. You're learning who truly saw you. And those who took you for granted, they may come back. They may beg, not because you owe them anything, but because they finally see what they lost when you stopped explaining, stopped giving, stopped showing up. But by then, you'll be standing in something greater. Not pain, not resentment, but peace. Because silence isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your wholeness. Let them feel the absence. Let them wrestle with the loss. And while they do, you keep becoming. There comes a sacred moment in life when you realize you don't owe your soul to anyone who couldn't hold it with care. And that realization doesn't come easy. It usually arrives after you've given your best to people who only knew how to take. After you've stayed too long in spaces where your heart felt heavy, Your voice felt small, and your spirit was constantly bending just to fit. You see, some people didn't love you. They loved the broken version of you. The version that was easy to control. The version that stayed quiet. The version that kept showing up even while bleeding. And when you start healing, when you start setting boundaries and raising your standards, suddenly they say you've changed. But the truth is, you didn't change. You remembered who you were before the pain made you forget. Some relationships are only comfortable with your struggle because your brokenness made you accessible. It made you dependent. It made you quiet. But healing? Healing makes you bold. It makes you discerning. It makes you walk with purpose. And that threatens people who only ever knew the version of you that needed them more than you needed yourself. But here's the truth you need to hold on to. God is calling you higher. And you can't fly if you're still chained to people who only clapped for your broken wings. Stepping back doesn't mean you're bitter. It means you're brave. It's not avoidance, it's alignment. It's not anger, it's wisdom. It's the holy act of saying, I will no longer shrink myself to keep others comfortable. When you step back, something divine begins to unfold. God steps in. He clears the noise. He reveals what your emotions tried to ignore. He brings clarity to the confusion and peace to the storm you didn't even realize you were living in. Stepping back is how you regain vision. You begin to see who was really for you and who just got used to the version of you who was always available, always pleasing, always sacrificing. Sometimes God allows the discomfort, so you'll finally detach from what's been quietly draining you. You weren't created to be everybody's answer. You weren't called to carry relationships that rest entirely on your effort. You are not required to keep explaining your heart to people who never had the capacity to hold it. So today, let this be a gentle but holy reminder. You are allowed to step back, to breathe, to protect your peace, to walk away from patterns that steal your joy, to stop apologizing for your boundaries. You're not being selfish. You're being faithful to the purpose God placed inside you. And trust me, when you make room by stepping back, God fills that space with truth, with strength, and with people who see you, really see you. So if you feel the nudge to step back, listen. It may just be the beginning of the healing you've been praying for. There's a holy kind of clarity that only comes in your absence. For so long, you've shown up. You answered the calls. You listened without being heard. You gave love without always receiving it back. You filled in the gaps, held the pieces together, carried the weight of people's expectations without complaint. And the truth is, many of them didn't see it. Not because you weren't valuable, but because you were always there. But when you step back, truly step back, not out of revenge, but out of reverence for your own soul, everything starts to shift. Your absence becomes a mirror. It reflects what your presence once covered. It reveals how much others depended on your strength, your encouragement, your unwavering support, and how little they acknowledged it. And that, my friend, is often the only way some people ever see the truth. You see, people can become comfortable with your sacrifice. They grow used to you being available. They expect you to hold space for their chaos, but never ask how you're really doing. And when you finally take that sacred pause, when you stop overgiving and start reclaiming yourself, it confronts them in ways your words never could. Yes, stepping back is hard, especially when your heart is still attached, especially when you prayed for that relationship, believed in that friendship, stayed loyal long after the signs told you to go. But here's the truth. Healing rarely happens in the same environment that caused the wounds. God sometimes leads us into silence not to punish others, but to protect us, not to isolate us, but to illuminate the truth we couldn't see when we were too busy managing everyone else's needs. And while you're away, while you're in that sacred space of distance, don't waste time wondering if they notice. They do. They feel your absence in conversations where your voice used to comfort, in decisions where your guidance once brought peace, in moments of need where you were always the first to show up. But don't rush back. Don't return because they finally realize what they lost. Come back only when you know you've been rebuilt. When your return is no longer about being needed, but about being seen, respected, and truly loved. Let your absence do what your presence couldn't. Let it reveal. Let it teach. Let it restore your soul. Because you weren't created to be everyone's lifeline. You were created to walk in alignment, with peace, with purpose, with the God who sees every tear and every silent sacrifice. And if they don't come looking, if they don't apologize, then maybe they were only drawn to your light, but never willing to protect your flame. So stay in your stillness. Let absence speak. And when you rise again, do it as someone whole. Let me ask you something real. How many times have you found yourself explaining your heart to people who were never truly listening? How often have you poured out your soul, hoping someone would finally get you, only to feel drained, misunderstood, and invisible? If that's you, you're not alone. We live in a world that constantly tells us to prove our worth, to explain our intentions, to defend our boundaries, to argue for our value. But here's the truth. You don't have to defend your heart to those who refuse to see it. You don't have to waste your breath on people committed to misunderstanding you. Because protecting your energy is more important than protecting your ego. You see, ego wants to be right. It wants to win. It wants the last word. But your soul craves peace. It longs for clarity, alignment, rest. And if you're not careful, you'll spend all your energy feeding your ego while your spirit quietly starves. God didn't create you to burn out proving your worth. He created you to walk in your worth, with quiet confidence and unshakable peace. There comes a point when you realize you don't have to show up to every argument. You don't have to answer every accusation. You don't have to attend every invitation to chaos. Sometimes the strongest move isn't to fight, it's to walk away. And no, walking away isn't weakness. Saying no isn't pride. Creating boundaries isn't bitterness. It's wisdom. It's knowing that your energy is sacred and it deserves to be invested in places that honor your purpose, not drain it. Think of your energy like a flame. If you give it to every wind that passes by, eventually you'll burn out. But when you protect that flame, when you guard it with intention and prayer, it becomes a light that not even the darkness can touch. And hear this. Some people were only drawn to your light because they needed warmth, not because they ever intended to honor its source. They loved what you gave, not who you were. And when you finally stop overextending, when you stop trying to convince them, you'll find something powerful, peace. That's where you meet God again, in the quiet, in the clarity, in the space where your energy is no longer diluted by dysfunction, but devoted to destiny. So today, give yourself permission to protect your energy. Say no without guilt. Step away without shame. Hold boundaries without needing to explain them to everyone. You're not being cold. You're being clear. You're not acting out of ego. You're moving in wisdom. Because your peace, it's not just a feeling. It's your assignment. And it's time to protect it. There's a war that plays out inside all of us, quiet but constant. It's the tug of war between ego and spirit. And it shows up in the little things, that urge to reply to the insult, that need to be understood, that temptation to have the last word. But here's what I've learned. Ego wants to argue. Spirit wants peace. And the direction you choose in those moments shapes not just your response, but your soul. Ego is loud. It demands validation. It wants to prove a point, to win every debate, to stay in control. But spirit? Spirit doesn't need the spotlight. It's anchored in something deeper, peace, presence, and purpose. Let me ask you, How many times have you walked away from a conversation more exhausted than empowered? How often have you spent your energy defending your heart to someone who never even tried to understand it? That's not wisdom. That's ego exhaustion. And your spirit? It's quietly asking for relief. Friend, not everyone deserves access to your heart. Not everyone is worthy of your energy. Some people want your attention, not your growth. Some want your reaction, not your healing. You've got to steward your spirit the same way you'd guard a sacred flame, because that's exactly what it is. When you start choosing peace over pride, when you start choosing silence over proving your point, you're not being passive, you're being powerful. It takes strength to stay present when your ego is itching to respond. It takes maturity to walk away from chaos, not because you're afraid, but because you're aligned. And when you protect your peace, you're actually protecting your purpose. Your joy is not a luxury, it's your fuel. And if you let every disagreement, every offense, every opinion drain you, you'll end up empty, tired, and far from where God is calling you to be. So today, I invite you to pause. Not every battle needs your sword. Not every critic deserves your explanation. Sometimes, the holiest thing you can do is not react. That's not weakness. That's spiritual clarity. That's you choosing to live from the inside out, from the place where God speaks, where peace grows, where your purpose is protected. You don't have to control everything to live in victory. You just have to surrender your ego and let your spirit lead. Because when you live from your spirit, calm, grounded, whole, you're not just walking in wisdom. You're walking in freedom. There's something powerful about silence that the world doesn't always recognize. In a culture that constantly demands explanations, reactions, and noise, choosing silence can feel like surrender. But I want you to hear this clearly. Silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's not retreat, it's strategy. Silence is not an empty space, it's filled with grace. It's the sound of strength held in restraint. It's maturity wrapped in discernment. It's the decision to let peace speak when words can't do justice. Have you ever been in a moment where you knew saying more would only stir the storm? Where you sensed deep down that arguing, defending, or explaining wouldn't change hearts, it would only drain yours. That's where silence becomes your shield. That's where silence becomes your sermon. You see, when you hold your peace, you're not avoiding the battle. You're inviting heaven into it. There are places where God can work only when you step aside. Your words might be sincere, but God's ways are sovereign. And sometimes the loudest transformation happens in the quiet spaces, when you stop talking and start trusting. Think about it. Jesus himself was silent before his accusers, not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew some truths are best revealed through silence. When you choose silence, not out of fear, but out of faith, you're saying, I don't have to fix this. I don't need to be understood by everyone. I trust that God sees, God knows, and God will move. Silence doesn't mean you're powerless. It means you're anchored. It means you've matured past the need to control every narrative. It means you're secure enough to let truth unfold in God's time, not yours. And trust me, in that silence, people notice. They notice the absence of drama. They notice the strength it takes to not respond. They start to wonder. They start to reflect. And often, the silence you chose in wisdom becomes the very thing that reveals the truth they tried to deny. So if you're in a season where you've stepped back, where your words have gone quiet, not because you've given up, but because you've grown up, I want you to know you're walking in wisdom. You're giving God room to do what only He can do. You're letting stillness speak where shouting would only cause harm. And in time, that silence will bear fruit. It will bring clarity. It will reflect strength. And it will echo far louder than anything you could have said. So stand firm in your quiet. Let it be your strategy. Let it be your surrender, not to people, but to purpose. Because in the silence, God is still speaking, and his voice always carries more weight than ours ever could. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is be still. In a world that tells you to hustle, to prove, to speak louder just to be seen, it can feel almost rebellious to step back. But I want to remind you today, stillness is not escape. It is spiritual alignment. Stillness is where you reclaim your peace. It's where you stop running from expectations and start returning to your true identity. Because in the stillness, God speaks. And when he does, he doesn't just whisper your name. He reminds you of who you really are: chosen, called, redeemed. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat in stillness long enough to feel your soul breathe? When did you last let silence be the sanctuary where your spirit could rest? So many of us move through life reacting, pushed, pulled, drained. We give our energy away to noise, to critics, to expectations that were never ours to carry. But there comes a moment, a sacred moment, when your soul says, enough. And that's when stillness becomes not just a pause, but a pathway to healing. See, stepping back isn't quitting. It's clarity. It's not running away from life. It's running toward God. It's saying, I refuse to lose myself in places where I'm only seen for what I do, not for who I am. And here's the beautiful truth. When you get quiet, when you stop chasing and start listening, everything changes. The people who once pushed you aside, they start to feel your absence. The ones who underestimated your strength begin to recognize the weight you carried in silence. But you will have already been changed. Because stillness doesn't just heal, it transforms. It brings you into alignment with your purpose. It anchors your spirit and protects your peace. It restores your heart, not with noise, but with knowing. And let me be clear, your silence is not revenge. It's not a tactic to make anyone suffer. It's not about proving a point. It's about protecting your soul. You're not punishing them. You're prioritizing you. You're choosing peace over performance. You're choosing stillness over striving. And in that stillness, God begins to rebuild what the world tried to break. He strengthens you in the quiet. He elevates you without announcement. He fills your spirit with the kind of peace that doesn't need applause. So, if you've stepped back, if you've chosen silence over chaos, know this: you are not falling behind. You are reclaiming your peace. You are listening to the one voice that matters most. And when you rise again, because you will, it won't be with the same tired heart. You'll rise restored. You'll rise rooted. You'll rise ready to walk in who you were always meant to be. Have you ever felt like nothing is happening, even though you're doing everything right? You've prayed. You've waited. You've obeyed. And yet, silence, delay, stillness. If that's where you are right now, I want to tell you, you are not being ignored. You're being prepared. You see, patience isn't passive. It's not sitting around, hoping life works out. Patience is an act of trust in God's perfect timing. It's the strength to hold your peace when everything in you wants to rush, fix, or force. It's the wisdom to wait, not because nothing is happening, but because God is doing more than you can see. Let me ask you, have you ever microwaved something and found it hot on the outside, but still frozen inside? Now compare that to something slow-cooked, deeply warmed, thoroughly transformed. That's what God's timing does. He's not rushing to impress the crowd. He's working on the deep places: your character, your healing, your capacity. But here's the hard part. Many people quit too soon. They interpret silence as abandonment, delay as denial. But the silence is sacred ground. It's where faith matures and ego dies. It's where we learn that God's promises are not fast food. They're fruit grown in season. The Bible says, "Be still and know that I am God." Not be busy, not be frantic, but be still. Because there's a kind of knowing that only grows in stillness. And there's a kind of strength that only shows up when you trust God enough to stop striving. The world teaches us that patience is weakness, but heaven sees patience as power. Because patience says, I don't need to control this. I know who holds it. It's the ability to say, I don't have to manipulate outcomes. I trust God to align the right thing at the right time in the right way. And when that happens, when you wait on God's will in God's way and at God's time, the result is unstoppable. Doors open no man can shut. Favor flows where effort once failed. And what once felt like loss becomes legacy. Friend, while you're waiting, God is working. Behind the scenes, in hearts you can't reach, in places you don't yet see. He's orchestrating something divine. And one day, when it all unfolds, you'll realize the wait wasn't a waste. It was the womb of everything beautiful. So don't rush what God is refining. Don't quit just because it's quiet. Instead, hold your peace. Anchor your soul in the promise that God is never late. He's always right on time. Sometimes what feels like the end is actually the beginning of something holy. There are moments in life when God calls you to step back, not in defeat, but in divine protection. Not because your value is diminished, but because He's preparing to reveal it in ways that silence and stillness can best deliver. You see, we live in a culture of rush. Rush to respond, rush to fix, rush to be seen, heard, understood. But restoration, true, lasting, God-breathed restoration, doesn't come through rushing. It comes through realignment, through quiet obedience, through the courage to wait when everything in you wants to run back and fix what's broken. Let me speak to the one who stepped back, who walked away, not because you didn't care, but because you finally did. You finally cared about your heart, your peace, your God-given purpose. And you knew, if you stayed where you were, you'd lose yourself. I want to remind you, stepping back isn't the end. It's the holy pause between who you were and who you are becoming. It's the sacred space where God reshapes you, restores your soul, and redefines your worth, not by their approval, but by His promise. I know it's tempting to go back the moment they notice you're gone. When the calls come in, when the apologies start, when the longing surfaces. But hear this, don't return just because they finally see you. Return only if God sends you. Because if they couldn't honor you in your presence, their reaction to your absence is not proof of change, it's the echo of loss. And your worth is not measured by what people realize too late. It's revealed in what God affirms in silence. In the waiting, God is not still. He's preparing you and preparing them. He's closing doors that once drained you and opening spaces that align with your healing. Some people are waking up to what they had, while you are waking up to who you really are. And when restoration is ready, it won't require you to beg, explain, or shrink. It will come in peace. It will come with clarity. It will come with fruit that proves it's from God. You'll walk back, not with wounds, but with wisdom, not with fear, but with faith, not to fit where you were, but to stand firm in who you've become. So don't rush the healing. Don't force the timing. You are not behind. You are being prepared. When the time is right, God will restore what was meant to grow, and what was never meant to stay will fade in the rear view with grace. Your return will not be a rescue mission. It will be a resurrection. Because this time, you're not going back as the same person. You're going forward, carrying peace, clarity, and the quiet strength that only comes from surrendering to divine timing. There comes a point in your journey when you realize not every battle is yours to fight. Not every accusation needs a response. Not every misunderstanding needs clarity. Not every loss is actually a defeat. Friend, your soul is far too valuable to be spent on proving yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Your energy, your peace, your calling, they are sacred, and they need protecting. Some of you are tired, not because you're weak, but because you've been pouring yourself out in places God never asked you to. You've been defending your heart in conversations that only wound you deeper. You've been fighting battles that were never assigned to you in the first place. Let me remind you of something holy. You don't have to fight when God already promised to defend you. You don't have to shout to be heard when heaven listens in silence. You don't have to explain when the truth is already on your side. Be still. I know that goes against every instinct in you. You want to speak. You want to fix it. You want to be understood. But what if the most powerful move is to pause, to step back, to stay silent, to let your absence speak where your words can't? Because when you are still, God moves. When you are silent, God speaks. And when you surrender, He strengthens. This is not passivity. This is spiritual wisdom. This is trust in divine timing. This is knowing when to let go and let grace take over. Have you ever noticed that peace follows the pause? That clarity often arrives after the silence? That joy comes not from control, but from surrender? Your soul was never designed to run on chaos. It was designed to rest in God's rhythm. And in that rest, you are renewed, not because life becomes easy, but because your spirit becomes steady. So I ask you now, what are you holding on to that's wearing you down? What battle have you been fighting in your strength when God has been waiting to carry it for you? Lay it down, walk in peace, and let your silence become the sound of faith. Because in the stillness, healing begins. In the quiet, wisdom grows. And in the surrender, God always wins. If this video helped you, let it echo. Like, share, subscribe for more insights, and keep building your inner power.